Okay, so I'm going to record on this computer, and Alicia, and I'll send it to you.
She says, my internet is unstable. I have electricians at my house and they
Yes,
turned off my Wi-Fi, so I'm on a cellular hotspot
Oh, wow.
with only one bar.
which is
I'm
not a
going-
very hot spot.
I'm going to sign off. Can you record this session? Thank you. See you all.
Yes, and we are recording, Alicia, so
Yes.
I can send it to you. Or you know what I'll do? I may find, you know what I could do with this is I could find, if I can figure out how to do it, I'll put it on our YouTube channel so anybody could see it.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. So yes, it is. So the point of view is certainly different. It's not what you expect in this book. It is, as they say, written from a different point of view. What did you think of the format, the collection of letters?
I love that kind of book. I mean, I remember reading the one that's written on from Guernsey Island about the
Oh, yeah.
the Potato Pie Society.
Yep.
I can't remember the whole name, but I love
Potato peel.
books that are written through letters and correspondence back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Although what's interesting about this, of course, you only get one set of letters, right? You don't have Wormwood's letters to Screwtape.
Right.
You've only got Screwtape's letters back to Wormwood. So fortunately, Screwtape does a good job of describing all of Wormwood's deficiencies in his letters.
Yes.
All right. What?
And it's interesting. I remembered all the descriptions of sort of the insidious ways that they work to, the guy has no name, right? Just the patient.
Patient, yeah.
Work to win him over to their side, and that it's always, oh, no, don't go for the big sin or the big evil. Just get him thinking about how this is going to affect him, or imagining a future when this might happen or that might happen, and then you'll have him.
Yeah.
Also, I think I had forgotten the whole thought that they eat each other.
Yes.
And
Yes.
since Wormwood has goofed up, they'll be having some of him for dinner. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wormwood does not come to a happy end in this book.
No.
No. And in fact, I think it's if I read it in an introduction, or if I read this somewhere else, if it was in Screwtape Makes a Toast, but apparently Lewis Lewis found that the process of writing this book, writing it from Screwtape's point of view,
Yeah.
was very taxing.
Yeah.
And that it was like years before he could go back to the Screwtape character, because it had been so sort of spiritually straining for him
Yeah.
to sort of
Yeah, I
write
guess
an entire book from Satan's point of view.
he had been asked to write more, and he for a long time couldn't even think about it because, like you said, it was so emotionally, spiritually draining for him to put himself completely in that place.
Yeah.
Think about the world from that perspective. I can understand how that could be. I mean, when I read his writing, he must have been a real genius to have come up with that whole perspective to begin with, and then to write it so successfully. You want to invite him for dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
His description, what chapter is that? It was 2, talking about God's mission, what God wants.
Yes.
He says he has a curious fantasy of making all these disgusting little human vermin into what he calls his free lovers and servants, sons of the word. He uses with his inveterate love of degrading the whole spiritual world by unnatural liaisons with the two-legged animals. Desiring their freedom, he therefore refuses to carry them by their mere affections and habits to any goals which he sets before them. He leaves them to do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And there lies our opportunity.
Yes.
That
Yes.
that was just an interesting
Yeah.
perspective, and that if they get through this initial dryness successfully, they become much less dependent on emotions
Mhm.
and therefore much harder to tempt.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that idea comes up comes up a couple of times in the letters. It is clear that Screwtape just doesn't understand what God is up to, right?
Mhm,
Or why God is up to it.
mhm.
What's in it for him?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. What does there's got to be something in this for him. We
Right.
just can't figure out what it is.
Well,
Right.
it sounds like they've spent years trying to figure out what God's motivation is
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
creating this world in this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's interesting, of course, is that Screwtape can't figure it out because he's got one way of looking at things.
Right.
Mhm.
And what God is doing does not fit into his way of looking at things.
Right.
Which is an interesting, I think, not to keep in mind just for Screwtape, but for all of us, right? Because all of us have our way of looking at things. And frequently we have trouble dealing with or understanding things that are different to the way we usually look at the world.
Oh, yeah.
So that this is one of the, you can look at it, you can say, oh, Screwtape's such an idiot, but then, we stop to think about ourselves and quite frankly, do any of us know what God is actually up to?
Yeah.
Not completely,
No, not completely.
in fact, if you get right down to it, we really don't know a whole lot more, how much more of it do any of us know than what Screwtape talks about here? That God loves us, but he wants us to do it on our own.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's, because he desires I've always, the metaphor for this, I've always thought, or I did when I was younger, and I haven't come up with anyone better, is that it's sort of like God wants us to love him, and he has a magic potion that he could use to make us do that, but he chooses not to do it. And you think about what you were like in high school, when you were mooning over that guy or that girl or whoever it was, and how, if you had just had some way to make them love you, that just would have been the greatest thing in the world. And, God, since God can do anything, God presumably has a way to make us love him, and we wouldn't even know that it was happening. But God doesn't do that. Because like Screwtape says, he wants us to do it on our own. It's like the way you want your kids to learn to do the right thing, not because they're rewarded if they do the right thing or punished if they do the wrong thing, but simply because you want them to do the right thing ultimately, simply because it's the right thing to do. And I think God thinks, what do I know what God thinks? Maybe God thinks that if God did something to coerce our affection, even if we didn't know it, it wouldn't be true love in a way.
It's a different kind of love.
Right. That's like, even if back in high school you had that magic potion, to make that special person love you, even once that happened, you'd still start wondering, is it me or is it the potion? Because if it's the potion, then they're not really in love with you. So that's, there's reasons why, God gives us, I think, why God gives us all of this freedom, which, as Screwtape says, is both a threat and an opportunity. Right. For him, I mean, for us and for him. Right. I mean, for us, the threat is that we can hopelessly bollocks it up.
Mhm.
But the what's the word he uses? Opportunity. But the opportunity for us is that as you do it, right, as we work at being Christians, as we work at getting to know God, to follow God, those sorts of things, right? You know, when you do things on your own, when you achieve something on your own, it's much more meaningful to you than it is if it's given to you.
Sure.
You know, none of us really value what we get for free. We tend to value more the stuff we have to work for.
For sure.
You know, or for the things, you know, we get at some sort of price. So yeah, and that's, you know, and that freedom is I suppose in a way it's a risky thing it's a risky thing for everybody, I guess, right? Because human beings can use that freedom to do all sorts of things. You know, we can good things, bad things, things that are good for us, things that are bad for us, for the world, for everybody. And while we're on letter number 2, go back to the beginning. Think about what Screwtape says about the church.
Oh, God.
Right? My dear Wormwood, I note with grave displeasure that your patient has become a Christian. One of our great allies at present is the church itself.
Yeah.
Do not misunderstand me. I do not mean the church as we see her spread out through all time and space and rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners. That, I confess, is a spectacle which makes our boldest tempters uneasy. But fortunately, it is quite invisible to these humans. All your patient sees is the half-finished sham Gothic erection on the new building estate. When he goes inside, he sees the local grocer with a rather oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book containing a liturgy which neither of them understands, and one shabby little book containing corrupt texts of a small number of religious lyrics, mostly bad, and in very small print. When he gets to his pew and looks around him, he sees just that selection of his neighbors whom he has hitherto avoided. What does Screwtape think of the church? And here's by extension, right? Because in some ways, Screwtape is Lewis's alter ego, right? So that when Screwtape offers an observation on something, in some ways, right, that's also Lewis offering an observation on something. So, you know, when Screwtape says to Wormwood, the church is like this, you know, that's also to a certain degree what Lewis probably thinks the church is like. So what does Screwtape think of the church?
Well, the people are not very impressive.
Okay.
You know, that I don't think you read that part, but you know, he knows that all the other people sitting in church, the patient knows that when people, that the other people aren't perfect by any means.
Yes.
Yes, if you were going to list off the Christian virtues, they're down a few.
Yep.
Also comes across to me as a very self-centered experience.
Yes.
Okay.
That in church you are not stepping out of yourself at all, according to him, and you are the same person you were the day before.
Okay. Okay. And you have to keep in mind, right, that Screwtape is probably a little, right, Screwtape and Lewis's ideas about the church are probably kind of similar, but Screwtape is probably much more down on it than Lewis, right? But I suppose one of the points that Screwtape makes is that there's a big difference, or there can be a big difference between church in theory and church as applied.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a real problem. I remember somebody who used to be one of our number deciding that we shouldn't talk when we go into church, and you know, we should come in on silence, and it should always be like Monday, Thursday, that you leave on silence and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, she left the church because we weren't at least partly, we weren't holy enough, or,
Mhm.
you know, there wasn't enough religiosity, if that I'm using that word correctly.
Yes.
You know, that we, it just bothered her that we were all talking all the time,
Mm.
which we,
And he says later on too, that one of the ways to get the patient off track is to encourage him to attend multiple churches,
Mhm.
and not to develop a relationship with other Christians in one place and go deeper than just the superficial acquaintances you might meet if you went to all of the churches in a certain region. And
Mhm.
I think he tells him a couple of churches where he can go and describes the leadership at the church, and it's kind of amusing. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, there's, and we all have that, I think, initial search, but then we find our home. And I think that rootedness to a place where you feel accepted and loved is he's saying, we don't want that to happen.
Mhm.
Keep this guy off balance, keep him searching, keep him looking around, and don't have him feel like he's part of a community where people do know more than just what's on the surface.
Mhm.
yeah. And my sons, you know, why don't you go to church? And they'll say, oh, well, you know, we've gone a couple of times, but there's no place like the church in Kent. And I say, well, the church in Kent wasn't like the church in Kent either.
Yeah.
The first couple of times
Right.
Mhm.
I went, you know, it takes a while, as you say, to get that deeper understanding of what's going on and who the people are and that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. And along with Cindy said about that, you know, the phrase we use today is church shopping, right? Which of course is a sort of phrase that C.S. Lewis would never say. I don't think he would ever say a term like church shopping. In fact, it probably wouldn't even pop into his head. But that's what he's talking about nonetheless. And this gets back to something Jan said about sort of the church's selfishness, right? Because that's why Screwtape wants Wormwood to send his patient out church shopping, right?
Mhm.
Because as long as the patient is out church shopping, is church about God or is church about the patient?
Right.
Right? Church is about the patient, right? And do you remember? I don't remember. I should have written down a note which letter it was. The letter where Screwtape says all the bad things about Congregationalists.
Yeah.
It is C.S. Lewis was a high church Anglican, Church of England. You can tell, right? That's why Screwtape says, whatever you do, don't let the patient go to the local Church of England parish, because that's exactly the church that Lewis thinks people should go to. And he does for exactly these reasons, because when you go to the local Church of England parish, you're going to see the entire town, right? You're going to see the smart people, the not so smart people, the rich people, the poor people, the well-educated people, the people who didn't get out of high school. And you'll see, you know, as the prayer in the prayer book says, all sorts and conditions of men. And that doing that, Lewis says, will get you, when you have to contend with people who are different than you, and when you've got to work with them, get along with them and things like that, that helps to move your attention away from yourself. Right? Whereas if you only spend your time associating with people who are just like you, all that sort of does is reinforce your focus on yourself. And you notice that's one of the things that Screwtape always encourages Wormwood to do, is to keep his patient focused on himself.
Yes.
Right? And not to focus on things bigger than him.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's a little bit about the church, right? You know, Screwtape is scared of the church, but not necessarily every church. During the time of the book, the patient associates with two different groups of people, right? He has sort of two groups of friends. Screwtape likes the first group, doesn't like the second group at all. What's the difference between the two groups?
The young couple that he associates first are more kind of pseudo intellectuals who are very much In my mind, they're very concerned with their outward appearance and what books they're reading and how they say things and interact in society. And it's all very a self-centered kind of way of dealing with the world. And the patient seems to have this chameleon ability when he's with them to say and do what they think would be proper. And then when he's with other people, he can say and act in a different way. And I think we've kind of all felt that way at sometimes in our lives as we navigate the world, you know, and then you kind of do an assessment. Am I with this group of people because we're like-minded and we care about each other? Am I trying to impress them for some reason? And it kind of, but it sounds like his relationship with that couple is very superficial.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is in part because the couple seems very superficial.
Right.
Right. You know, and you know, you can't have a deep relationship with a superficial person. So that, yeah, so that I think that's why Screwtape says, you know, if it tells Wormwood, you know, if you can keep your patient associating with that, you know, with that couple and their sort of wider set of friends, then we're a long way towards our goal, right? Because as long as he's focused on the superficial, as long as he's focused on himself, the more time he spends with those things, the less time he's going to spend thinking about the things that really matter. Because it's when they start thinking about the things that really matter, Screwtape says, that's when we get into trouble. Because we don't want them thinking about the things that really matter until it's too late to do them any good. So what's the problem with the second group of people? And that's his girlfriend and I guess her family and her set of friends.
Right. They're much more open to everybody.
Okay, they are, and there's one big problem with them. And with the girl in particular. Let me. This is letter 22. In my edition, it's page 117. That may do you no good at all.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I got it.
My dear Wormwood, so your man is in love, and in the worst kind he could possibly have fallen into, and with a girl who does not even appear in the report you sent me. Go down to the next full paragraph. I looked up the girl's dossier, and I am horrified at what I find. Not only a Christian, but such a Christian. A vile, sneaking, simpering, demure, monosyllabic, mouse-like, watery, insignificant, virginal bread and butter miss, the little brute. She makes me vomit. She stinks and scalds through the very pages of the dossier. It drives me mad the way the world has worsened. We'd have had her in the arena in the old days. That's what her sword is made for. Not that she'd do much good there either. A two-faced little cheat, I know the sort, who looks as if she'd faint at the sight of blood and then dies with a smile. The sort of creature who'd find me funny. Filthy, insipid little prude. And you already fall into this booby's arms like any other breeding animal. Why doesn't the enemy blast her for it if he's so moonstruck by virginity instead of looking on there grinning? Yes, the problem with this girl is apparently that not only is she a Christian, but she's a very serious one. And she is a list of all that and that's, of course, that is why Screwtape is so thoroughly disgusted with her. Because she's exactly not the sort of person that she wants the patient to associate with. In fact, it's a couple of pages later on, page 120 in my edition, Screwtape gets so upset that what happens to him?
Somebody else has to finish the letter.
Yes, why does somebody else have to finish the letter?
He transforms into a centipede.
Yes, he turns into a centipede.
I knew there was a reason why I hated those things.
Yeah.
It creeped me out.
Signed by Toad pipe. I love that.
Yes.
The names are fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, this is page 119 for me, the paragraph. Then, of course, he gets to know this woman's family and whole circle. Could you not see the very house she lives in is one that he ought never to have entered? The whole place reeks of that deadly odor. The very gardener, though he has only been there 5 years, is beginning to acquire it. Even guests after a weekend visit carry some of the smell away with them. The dog and the cat are tainted with it. And a house full of impenetrable mystery. We are certain, it is a matter of first principles, that each member of the family must in some way be making capital out of the others, but we can't find out how. So, why can't Screwtape and the other devils figure out what's going on inside the house?
Because they can't understand selflessness.
Right.
You
Yes.
can't, yeah. It's
Yeah.
the exact opposite of what they know.
Yeah. Yes. Apparently this household is so thoroughly suffused with decency
Mhm.
that the devils don't even know what's going on inside.
Right.
Yes. Yes. So is there a larger lesson in that? We've got one group of people who are superficial, and Screwtape just loves them. I mean, he says, Wormwood, send your patient over there as often as you can. And then we've got this group of people who, and I think at this point, I think, Screwtape is starting to think that it's probably all over for Wormwood at this point, because Wormwood has just made a horrible mistake letting his patient associate with these people. So is there a larger point to that? Or to put it this way, does the company you keep make a difference?
Oh, yes, I think definitely. Because somebody was saying, maybe Ruth, that we do tend, or no, maybe it was you, Cindy, but when you get to, when you move into a new group, you do try to fit in or make yourself appealing to them so that they will accept you.
Yeah. Yes.
On the other side, there are people that will discourage you from associating with people like that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We can imagine that
friends, family members, there are a lot of people who would speak up.
Yeah. Yes, we can imagine that the patient's first set of friends were extremely disappointed when the patient took up with this new group. Yeah, absolutely. George Washington had this little book of maxims that he kept. And one of his maxims was good companions make for good character. And that's, and that's one of the reasons, and I suppose that's one of the reasons ideally, or one of the reasons why the church, why going to church is important. Why, I mean, not just going to church on Sunday morning, but participating in the life of a church is important, right? Because that's where, hopefully you're running into companions with good character, right? And that they, associating with folks like that helps to, strengthen your own walk. It helps to strengthen your own faith. It helps to strengthen your own habits, and the way you think about things. And it helps you to keep focused. So that's the important thing. The important thing about character.
It's also interesting that Screwtape doesn't like intelligent people. That's another bad thing, is if people are too well read.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
But that's got to be because C.S. Lewis himself is so proud of his fine mind and so feels that he has benefited so much from reading what other people have written and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes, that's certainly part of it. Yes. One of the ways I suppose this Screwtape sort of reflects Lewis.
Yes.
Right. So let's not ask Screwtape. Let's ask Lewis. Why is that? Why if we were to ask Lewis, why is that important? What do you think? What do you think Lewis would say?
People who read and are intelligent have much broader views.
Okay.
They think more broadly. They can certainly recognize readily superfluous ideas or
Also
traits or whatever far more easily than people who never raise their heads.
and they're less likely to give way to their emotions. They're more likely to think through what the right thing to do is.
Well,
Okay.
he also dedicates this book to J.R.R. Tolkien,
Yes.
which means that within that group of people, they were intellectuals, and this is the world that he lived in. This is the world that he knew out in Cambridge, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. First Oxford and then Cambridge. Yes. Yeah. And I think part of that is I think we've hit on a lot of the reasons why Lewis would think that's important. You know, like Jan said, it can give you a broader view, and of course it's not a guarantee, right? I mean, there are a lot of really smart, really well-educated people who are just insufferable pains in the ass, and their learning did not help a whole lot in that regard, or it actually made them worse. I think also, I think it helps to keep people from distraction. And I think if there's one thing for me, if you can sum up Screwtape's advice for Wormwood in one word, the word is distraction. Do whatever you can do to keep your patient distracted. Because because as long as he's distracted, he can't, like I said before, he can't focus on what really matters. Which I think is an important thing for us to keep in mind, because we live in a world where it's even easier now to be distracted now than it was in 1941 when this book came out. And the temptations to being distracted are so much greater. But there was something, I think it was something that Jody said, and it was the tension between reason and emotion.
Yes.
And this, once again, this probably reflects Lewis's background, right? Screwtape says if you want to keep your patient on our side, keep him focusing on his emotions, right? Don't get him thinking about stuff, right? Don't get him using his reason, because once he starts using his reason, we're all in big trouble. Where is it? Oh, and it was like in the first letter.
Yes, it was.
Let's see.
Bottom of 18.
Yep.
Okay.
I have different page numbers, so which letter is it?
Yeah.
4.
Okay.
For if he ever comes to make the distinction, I think he's talking about emotion and what he wants to be there versus what is. If he ever makes the distinction, if he ever consciously directs his prayers, this is prayers.
Yes. Here's what I'm looking for. This is like the second page of the first letter.
Oh, all right.
Jen, sorry to cut you off.
That's all right.
The trouble about argument, Screwtape says, is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's own ground.
Oh, yes.
He can argue too, whereas in really practical propaganda of the kind I am suggesting, He has been shown for centuries to be greatly inferior to our Father below. By the very act of arguing, you awake the patient's reason. And once it is awake, who can foresee the results? Even if a particular train of thought can be twisted so as to end in our favor, you will find that you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of attending to universal issues and withdrawing his attention from the stream of immediate safe sense experiences. Right, so that's that you never want your patient attending to universal issues. Right, if at all possible, like we said, you've got to keep your patient distracted.
And teach him to call it real life. And
Yes.
don't let him ask what he means by real.
Yes. Yes. Because nobody really knows what's real life. Right? What does Screwtape mean? When Screwtape tells Wormwood, you've got to keep your patient focused on real life. What does that mean?
To me, it means what's immediately in front of your nose.
Yep. Yes, there's the story, and actually it's also in the first letter. Screwtape tells the story about one of his patients. He says, let me see. He says, I once had a patient, a sound atheist, who used to read in the British Museum. One day as he sat reading, I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go the wrong way. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in a moment. Before I knew where I was, I saw 20 years of work beginning to totter. Now, if I had lost my head and begun to attempt the defense by argument, I would have been undone. But I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of the man which I had best under my control and suggested that it was just about time he had some lunch. And then he says, once he was in the street, the battle was won. I showed him a newsboy shouting the midday paper and a number 73 bus going past. And before he reached the bottom of the steps, I had got him into an unalterable conviction that whatever odd ideas might come into a man's head when he was shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life, by which he meant the bus and the newsboy, was enough to show him that all that sort of thing just couldn't be true. Yes, so that I guess the concern for Lewis, the attraction for Screwtape of real life in that way, right? The noise and the bustle and all of that sort of stuff, right? Is that is such a tremendous source of distractions, right? He sees the newsboy and, you know, the newsboy out of maybe the newsboy is dirty or ragged, or even if he's a perfectly lovely, clean, you know, angelic newsboy, right? He's yelling and screaming about, you know, whatever horror is in the news that day, and the bus rumbles past and it's, you know, dirty and smoky and smelly, and it's full of, you know, unpleasant, disreputable, the sort of people who have to take the bus. And just not are those things distracting, but they can also be, right, annoying, right? Because it's a certain, you need a, I suppose you want, if you're Screwtape, you want a certain kind of distraction, right? You don't want the sort of distraction that could lead to your patient getting focused on something important, right? It can't be the sort of distraction that could get him, could like fill him with awe or joy or inspiration or something like that.
Early on, he gets nervous when Wormwood describes the patient reading a book simply for enjoyment and then taking a walk to the mill to get tea. And he has this almost a conversion experience doing something just joyful and simple and it sounds like, you know, in the quiet of the natural world, doing things that bring simple pleasure has brought this man almost back to, you know, being devout, and it's making Screwtape extremely nervous.
Right. Yeah, because that's exactly the wrong sort of distraction. You don't want a quiet, simple, sort of meditative distraction. You don't want to distract him with, I don't know, a view of the Grand Canyon. You don't want to distract him with, a beautiful piece of music, which you notice, by the way, Screwtape hates music.
Mhm.
In fact, there's a whole, in fact, it's the letter where the patient meets the wrong kind of girl, where Screwtape goes, well, actually, I guess it's after he turned into a centipede. So it's his secretary who writes about all the dangers of music.
Mhm.
So they're good distractions and they're bad distractions, right? Some sort of inspiring music, beautiful art, inspiring nature, simple walk in the woods. Those are not the kind of distractions you want, right? Because those are inspiring. Those give your patient an opportunity to think. They keep your patient from being distracted by something else. That's the sort of thing that can get you into trouble, right? You want noise, you want busyness, you want the internet, you want a cell phone that dings for some reason, every 45 minutes. That's the sort of stuff you want if you want to keep your patient on the right track. Let the man slip through your fingers. What does Screwtape think about the war? The war is obvious, the Second World War, right?
It's neutral. It can be good or bad.
Okay. All right.
It sort of just brings out what people really are.
Okay. What are some ways where war can be a help to Screwtape and Wormwood?
Because it people can, I'm not sure I'm remembering this right, but be so filled with hate, have unreasoning hate.
Okay.
And fear.
And fear.
That's probably the bigger one. Yeah.
Yes. That's the opportunity in war for Screwtape and Wormwood, is that it can lead to fear, because when you're afraid of something, what are you focused on? Yourself. Fear keeps you focused on you. What's the danger in war for Screwtape and Wormwood?
People might be given over to, I've lost the word, but to selfless endeavors.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, that it can encourage people to be courageous. It can encourage them to be brave. It can encourage them to focus on their country or their fellow, to focus on things larger than themselves. And that you don't want that. So when the war starts and Wormwood thinks this is going to be great, Screwtape says maybe yes, maybe no. Right. And then a little bit later on, when Wormwood apparently sends a letter to Screwtape and says that there is a chance that his patient may be drafted and drafted into service, right? Screwtape repeats the same thing. This could be good. It could be bad. It all depends on how you handle it, Wormwood. If you use this as a way to keep your patient afraid, to keep him focused on himself, to keep him focused on his anxieties and his hatreds and things like this, then it's good. The problem, of course, is that for the patient, the war acts in the exact opposite way. Now, there are just a couple of allusions to it in Screwtape's letters, but how does the patient seem to react to the events of the war?
He does pitch in and want to be helpful.
Yes. He does. He apparently serves as, it sounds like he's serving as an air raid warden or something like that. So he doesn't actually get drafted, but he apparently volunteers for service. And then do you remember there's a letter, it's second half of the book, maybe towards the end actually, where there's an air raid on the town that the patient lives in.
Mm-hmm.
And does Screwtape think the air raid was a success or a failure from their point of view? Does it help them or hinder them in keeping the patient on their side? How does, I put it in this, a better question, how does the man react?
I have not read that one.
It is, I should take better notes. Unselfishness established as a rule. Wormwood, you're doing very little good. Love. Enemy makes themes, prayers, and endeavors. Air raid. Rubbish about the war. Balls kill men. How he reached persevere. Outseen of adversity. Appetite for heaven. Okay, not trying to make him brave. Creating a dangerous world. Oh, this is actually, we'll come back to my original question in a second. I'm looking at letter 29 in my edition, page 161. Screwtape has something very interesting to say about the world being dangerous.
61. Right.
So this is we're not and this is the prospect that the Germans will, there's the certainty that the Germans will bomb the patient's town, but it hasn't happened yet. So this is 161. This indeed is probably one of the enemy's motives for creating a dangerous world, a world in which moral issues really come to a point. He sees as well as you do that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality, a chastity or honesty or mercy which yields to danger will be chaste or honest or merciful only on conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Pilate was merciful until it became risky.
Yeah.
So that there's the big danger. The danger is that the prospect of this, the certainty that the city is going to be bombed, which Wormwood thinks is great, Screwtape says is actually very risky because it may encourage your patient to be courageous.
Right.
And courage is something we don't want. Because courage by its very nature, particularly in a setting like that, focuses people's attentions outward.
Yes. Big time.
Right? Yes. You're not, because if you're just trying to save yourself, that's not courage, that's cowardice.
And he says that cowardice is one of the things that we are least able to accept in other people.
Yes. And even today, right? Even today, we have people have trouble accepting cowardice in other people.
Right. I highlighted that, not the part just below it that you read. Cowardice, alone of all the vices, is very painful, horrible to anticipate, horrible to feel, horrible to remember. Hatred has its pleasures. It's therefore often the compensation by which a frightened man reimburses himself for the miseries of fear. The more he fears, the more he will hate. And hatred is also a great anodyne for shame. To make a deep wound in his charity, you should therefore first defeat his courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's so we have the setup, and then you've got page 30 or letter 30. You've got the result, it sounds like, of the air raid. My dear Wormwood, I sometimes wonder whether you think you have been sent into the world for your own amusement. I gather not from your miserably inadequate report, but rather from that of the infernal police that the patient's behavior during the first air raid has been the worst possible. He has been very frightened and thinks himself a great coward and therefore feels no pride. But he has done everything his duty demanded and perhaps a bit more. So why is this the worst possible behavior out of the patient?
Because he ended up doing the right thing, but not being proud of doing the right thing. So he was humble and virtuous.
Yes.
It's a bad combo.
Exactly. Yes. So he's courageous because he does what he has to do and a little bit more. But yes, but as you said, Jody, he doesn't feel proud.
Well, that's because he did it totally outside of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of that, it's very hard to feel pride for that,
Mhm.
because that was not necessarily your intention to earn all this praise at all. It was
Right.
motivation to begin with was so different. It's hard to build, have pride on that,
Mm.
Yes.
of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly in a setting like that, I think we're doing the right thing by definition means you're doing something for people other than you. Right. And that's, and if you've ever talked to, police or firemen who have done something, that other people think is heroic, or, people who've done, servicemen and women who've done something tremendous in the line of duty, they almost always don't see themselves as being heroic.
Right.
That their usual response is something like, well, I just did what I was supposed to do. I just did what I had to do. I just did my duty. Right. Because that I'd imagine in Screwtape, I don't think ever says anything about duty, but I would imagine that there are a few things that Screwtape would want to see develop in a patient more than a sense of duty.
Yeah.
That a sense of I do this thing, whatever it is I do, not because it's advantageous to me necessarily, but because in this setting, it's simply the right thing to do.
Right.
I was in a situation like that very early on in my teaching career. It was an open house night. Parents were there with their children, and the parents had given this little girl a hard candy, and it got lodged in her throat. She was choking, and I grabbed her and did the Heimlich maneuver. And I have been trained for many years to do it. I didn't even think about what I had to do. I just knew I had to do it. And they were like, "Oh, we're going to write you into the will," and and I'm like, it's not like I planned to be a hero that night, it just came almost as an instinct that it wasn't anything about me. It was helping this little girl to be able to breathe again. And it is, I think about these people who do this on a day-to-day basis, and they are heroes. They are incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? They have this selfless kind of existence where they do this and it's just their work. And it's just, I can see where, Screwtape would find that very disconcerting.
Yes, absolutely. Because once again, because it leads you away from yourself.
Yeah.
And for Screwtape, that's you always want to keep, I guess you want to keep your patient two things. You want to keep him distracted. You want to keep him focused on himself.
Right.
And of course, when he's distracted, it's easier to keep him focused on himself. And then what does their prayer comes up a couple of times in the letters. I don't think there are probably a couple of letters that are strictly about prayer. But what does Screwtape seem to think about prayer? Or once again, right? And you can talk about prayer the same way you talk about church, right? There is where we said there's church in theory, that's the army that's terrible with banners. And then there's church in reality, which is that collection of, oily people and bad singing. And the same thing goes with prayer, right? There is prayer in theory, which is communication with the divine. And then there's prayer in real life.
Right. So a lot of the prayers are rote prayers that you learn as a child, or are weekly prayers in church.
Okay.
I can't remember what he says about that except just listing them off. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I think if Screwtape is in favor of rote prayers, right? Because you're just saying the words.
Yes, you don't have to think about it.
Right, without and probably without thinking about what you're saying, right? Because when you learn a prayer, it's like the Lord's Prayer, unfortunately. But most of the time when people say the Lord's Prayer, they don't really focus on what they're saying, because we've said it so often and for so many years that once somebody gets started, you just follow with the words. And in fact, when I first started here, the thing that I thought about all the way through the Lord's Prayer was saying trespasses.
Mhm.
because I'd never been in a church that said trespasses before.
Yep.
So I was like, our Father who art in heaven. And my head immediately started saying, you've got to say trespasses. It's coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. Don't say debts. Don't say sins. Say trespasses. And that was my focus. Was saying, it wasn't on the prayer. It was just on saying trespasses and not sins or debts or transgressions or whatever those other words.
Yes,
But you-
well, my sweet husband Wink, I had to talk him into trespasses because I was embarrassed to have only one person saying debtors, but he was quick to point out, no, the Greek says debts, money, debts.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
somebody else decided to say trespasses, but
Interesting.
the original is debts.
Yep. Yes. But that's, how many times have you done that when you've said the Lord's Prayer, right? You get to the end and you're like, oh, I'm done. Because, while you were, your conscious brain was like, what I'm going to have for lunch, what I need to do this afternoon, because, you've just said the prayer so often that you just say it, your subconscious takes over and you say the words and your conscious mind comes back when you get to the end.
Every once in a while, I skip a section. I jump ahead. Oh, no.
Well, I can remember praying with my grandmother in her church, and in her growing up, for thine is the kingdom and the glory forever. And she put forever and ever,
Mhm.
at the end. So everyone else would stop for the, at the first forever, and she would add another one. And I'd be like, this is when I was a little girl. I'm like, oh my God.
Uh-huh. God is going to smite you because you said the prayer wrong.
I know, and everybody heard it.
Yeah.
'Cause it got tacked on to the end.
There's no getting out now. You didn't do it right. Yeah.
And for John, he's Roman Catholic, so he doesn't put that part on at all. So
That's
he
right.
has to really think
Mhm.
about, because that for him that comes after in another part.
Yep. Yeah, because he learned Luke's version.
Right.
The Catholic version is Luke's version of the Lord's Prayer. The Protestant version is Matthew's.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So Screwtape likes rote prayers because God only knows what your patient's thinking about when he's saying one of those. I mean, those things are just an invitation to distraction. What about times when the patient has trouble praying or when the patient gets distracted when he's praying? What is
Yeah.
there? Go ahead, Jody.
Well, I remember that, but I'm trying to remember exactly what he says, but except that make him feel bad about that, make him feel like he's doing it all wrong.
Mhm.
If his mind goes someplace else.
Yep. Yes, it's an opportunity to make him feel guilty, which of course keeps him focused on him, because
Yes.
guilt is all about you. There's another, yes. So it's an invitation to distraction. And Screwtape talks about that, when he first becomes a Christian, that dryness in prayer. And Screwtape says that dryness is great if you can take advantage of it to keep him distracted. But there's a danger in it if the patient pushes through.
Right.
What's the danger? I think for Screwtape, almost the danger in prayer isn't so much what the patient says. I think for Screwtape, the danger in prayer
It's being open.
is it might not even, it could be that it makes one open to God, open to the enemy. But I think for Screwtape, prayer becomes in some way a bad habit.
Mm.
Because if your patient pushes through the dry spots, I think for Screwtape, prayer is sort of like, it's like tennis or cooking or it's a skill.
Mhm.
And that it's, and that when the patient starts off, he's probably going to be pretty awful at it. And that's why he's got those rote prayers and those prayers that he learned when he was a kid. And, his prayer life is just a little bit of bits and pieces he's picked up from other places. But the problem is that, like practicing, playing tennis or anything else, the more he does it, the better he's going to get at it.
Mhm.
And the better he gets at it, then it becomes sort of a well, for the patient, from our point of view, it's a good habit, right? It becomes a discipline. And of course, from Screwtape's point of view, the problem with the discipline is that, right, discipline is the opposite of distraction.
Right.
Right, because if I build, if I build in certain disciplines, right, if I build in certain habitual ways of doing things, then, that's why we call them spiritual disciplines, not spiritual distractions, right? Because the idea is that those disciplines carry you further and further away from yourself and closer to God, because when you start, being disciplined about anything is hard. Being disciplined about coming to church is hard. Being disciplined about prayer is hard. Being disciplined, practicing anything is hard when you start. But the more you work at it, the better you get. The better you get, the more disciplined you get. And the more disciplined you get, then the more that is something that pulls you away from yourself, right? Your prayers become less and less about you. Or if they are about you, are about things you need and things that you're concerned about and things like that, they're about you, but they're not. They're about you in the sense that, you tell God what's going on, but then they're not about you, because once you've done that, you stop. I'm not putting it well.
Well, I like and this ties in with that somewhat in letter number, is that 3? 4 on prayer.
Okay.
Let's see. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings there by the action of their own wills.
Yes.
When they meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings for themselves and not notice that this is what they are doing. When they meant to pray for courage, let them really be trying to feel brave. When they say they are praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment. Just that emphasis of praying at the same time you're searching for the feeling that you're praying about.
Yes, because if prayer is all about what you feel, what's prayer all about?
Yourself.
It's all about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. You're not praying to communicate with God. You're not praying for whatever reason, right? You're praying to generate a certain feeling. And there's a second reason that I think Wormwood should focus on getting his patient to focus on his feelings in prayer, because when the patient gets done praying and feels like his prayer time has been a waste of time, what is that going to do?
Make it less likely that he'll keep praying.
Exactly. That's so if your prayers don't produce the right result, right? Because that's what he's praying for. He's praying to produce a result, and if his prayers don't produce the right result, that could help to discourage him from praying, because the reality is praying will frequently not produce that. I mean, if you pray to feel good about yourself when you're done, we all know that praying frequently does not do that. That there are times where you may be concerned about something and you may pray about it, you may feel better about it, but there are lots of other times when prayer is kind of a drag, where it's like you've got the machine that serves you tennis balls and you're just slamming, you practice your backhand by hitting 1,000,000 backhands, which, for most of the time is pretty darn tedious. But if you do that long enough, end up with a pretty good backhand. But that's the only way you'll get it, right? That's why, you know, in coaching, in sports, you know, coaches will have teams run drills that players just hate. But they do that because the drill is the only way to teach the player, you know, what they're supposed to do. And in some ways, that's what prayer is. It's not about the immediate result.
Right.
It's about the discipline
Mhm.
of not focusing on you. So yes, so for Screwtape, prayer is a threat, but also in some ways it's an opportunity.
Mhm.
I think with
That's-
any of the disciplines, if you get so caught up in it, and if you spend time in prayer and thought about what being a Christian means, how to live a Christian life, and then you don't do anything about it, you know, if it doesn't lead to an improved relationship or a willingness to help others or just some kind of action, you know, then that would be a good thing for Screwtape, you know, if you just get caught up in the ritual. But if this time of contemplation and prayer and being part of a religion doesn't change anything for you, then he's won.
Right. Yep. So let's see.
I love the description about gluttony.
Oh, yeah. What chapter is that?
Let's see.
Or letter is that? And it's actually it's a view of gluttony.
17.
17 that you
Page 87. The contemptuous way in which you spoke of gluttony as a means of catching souls in your last letter only shows your ignorance.
Mhm.
One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on that subject, so that by now you will hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe. This has largely been affected by concentrating all our efforts on gluttony of delicacy, not gluttony of excess. And he talks about the patient's mother, about how she wants her toast crisp and her tea weak.
Yes, but not too weak.
Not too weak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just tickled me.
Yes. And but for Screwtape, and this probably is a place where Screwtape really does directly represent Lewis, just the next page, or bottom of that page, she is a positive terror to hostesses and servants. She was always turning from what has been offered her to say with a demure little sigh and a smile, "Oh, please, please. All I want is a cup of tea, weak, but not too weak. And the teeniest weeny bit of really crisp toast." You see, because what she wants is smaller and less costly than what has been set before her, she never recognizes gluttony, or as gluttony, her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. And of course, that's the kind of gluttony that Screwtape wants to encourage and that Lewis is concerned about.
Right.
Right? He says, you know, when we think of gluttony, and until I read this letter, that was the way I thought of gluttony, gluttony is too much,
Right.
too much of something, too much food, too much to drink, to whatever it is.
Very interesting.
But for Lewis, there's this gluttony of desire, this need to always have things your way, to always make sure you get what you want.
Right. Wow.
Now, let me ask you a question. Does the culture we live in today encourage or discourage that second kind of gluttony?
Oh, yeah, it definitely encourages them.
Okay.
It-
Yeah. So to ask the question is to answer it.
Yes, yes.
Some
Yeah.
people have perfected it to an art form.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. And this is chapter 18. He talks a little bit about love. Let's see, my dear Wormwood, this is letter 18. Even under Slubgob, who apparently runs the college, he must have learned the routine techniques of sexual temptation. And since for us spirits, the whole subject is one of considerable tedium, I will pass it over. The enemy's demand on humans takes the form of a dilemma, either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. So we're talking about love and marriage here. Ever since our father's first great victory, we have rendered the former very difficult to them. That's abstinence. The latter for the last few centuries, we have been closing up as a way of escape. We have done this through the poets and novelists by persuading the humans that a curious and usually short-lived experience, which they call being in love, is the only respectable ground for marriage, that marriage can and ought to render this excitement permanent, and that a marriage which does not do so is no longer binding. This idea is our parody of an idea that came from the enemy. So what's my question here? Well, I don't know, what does, there's a point I'm trying to make here, and I don't know exactly for the words to make it. Dang.
But it's sort of like what we were saying about the first blush of being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that goes, then you have to have taken on the discipline and the service and that kind of stuff. And
Yes.
that if you think that being in love is why you get married, then you shouldn't expect, that what generally happens is that changes over time, and you don't get thrilled sitting across the dinner table from somebody the way you used to.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, true.
Or that sometimes when you're sitting across the dinner table from them, you want to hit them in the face with a baseball bat. And that's what we tell people, right? That's what we tell kids about marriage. It's not just what society tells kids about marriage, it's what we tell our kids about marriage.
Well,
Right?
I think
Someday
they see
you're
it.
going to meet this wonderful person, and you're
Yeah.
going to fall in love, and it's all going to be hearts and flowers. And
Instead of poets and novelists, it's now film producers who
Oh, yeah.
show you this kind of
Mhm.
glamorized, it's the Disney princesses all over
Oh,
again.
my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like life isn't like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It sometimes always doesn't turn out okay at the end. You have to work at it.
Yeah. 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 So when you're Gabby, what should we tell kids about marriage and like falling in love? Well, let me tell you something. When you meet this guy or you meet this other person, and you're willing to sit across from the breakfast table with him, even when you want to hit him in the face with a brick, that's the guy you should marry right there. Right? Because of course for Screwtape, the great thing about that idea about love and marriage, of course, is that it inevitably leads to disappointment. Right? Because it never works. Right? Even those of you, who've been married, for people who've been married for a long time and had very successful marriages, after 2 years, after a month and a half, you don't love your spouse the way you married them you don't love them the way you love them on your wedding day. Right? You just can't.
Right.
Right? Because everything we do at weddings is engineered to create that utterly unrealistic feeling.
Right.
Because in the church, we've been in the wedding business for a long time. And if there's one thing we know how to do in the church, it's generate a particular emotion.
Mhm.
Right. So that there's an unreality to it. And that's so that, so this goes on. So we talk some more about love and marriage on the next page. Now, the enemy's philosophy is nothing more nor less than one continued attempt to evade this very obvious truth. So let's go up to the truth. The whole philosophy of hell, this is the paragraph above. The whole philosophy of hell rests on recognition of the axiom that one thing is not another thing, and especially that one self is not another self. My good is my good and your good is yours. When one gains, another loses. Even an inanimate object is what it is by excluding all other objects from the space it occupies. If it expands, if it expands, it does so by thrusting other objects aside or by absorbing them. A self does the same. With beasts, the absorption takes the form of eating. For us, it means the sucking of will and the freedom out of a weaker self into a stronger. To be means to be in competition.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm.
So hell, according to Screwtape, is run on the idea that life is a zero-sum game.
Right.
Right? Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. How does he contrast this with the enemy's philosophy? Now, the enemy's philosophy is nothing more nor nothing less than one continued attempt to evade this very obvious truth. He aims at a contradiction. Things are to be many, yet somehow also one. The good of oneself is to be the good of another. This impossibility he calls love, and this same monotonous panacea can be detected under all he does and even all he is or claims to be. What does Screwtape mean there about the enemy, or about the enemy's view of life?
That it can be good for everybody, and one person's blessing doesn't take a blessing away from someone else.
Yep. In fact, one person's blessing can be a blessing to somebody else,
Mhm.
or that blessing somebody else can be a blessing to you.
Yep.
Right? So that the enemy looks at creation in a completely different way than Screwtape does, right? For Screwtape, like we said, it's a zero-sum game, so it's always about competition.
Right.
And the way I have more is by taking something away from you. For the enemy, life is completely different. Life, you could say, is sort of based on a sort of cooperation that leads to more, right? More, I don't know, more of whatever it is, right? More blessing, more love, more contentment, more happiness, more of whatever it is.
Mhm.
So that the enemy's idea, and of course, and this gets back to the enemy's idea of marriage, right? That's what marriage is supposed to be about. That marriage is supposed to be sort of a mutual blessing, but not based on that strange feeling about being in love, but it's based on this sort of self-sacrificing commitment. And that's the thing that Screwtape doesn't get about marriage, right? Is the sacrificing part. The idea that by sacrificing for my partner, I can be a that can be a blessing to both of us. This Screwtape just doesn't get that. And he doesn't understand that for the enemy, that everything works like that. It's not just marriage, right? But that for the enemy, almost anything can be the sort of thing where sacrificing can lead to blessing for everybody. And where sacrificing doesn't make you poorer, it actually can make you richer. Which, like I said, and Screwtape talks about it specifically in regard to marriage, but it's a larger principle that he's concerned about, and it connects to what we said about what happens to the patient during the war, right? Where the patient stops being focused on himself, right? He becomes focused on his community, becomes focused on helping others. So that ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? Is that moving away, because and this is, and in some way our world sort of operates on that same sort of hellish principle, doesn't it? I mean, the world we live in is one that is based on relentless competition. right? It's based on political competition, economic competition. You know, they're, you know, in some places, I mean, you know, parents are in competition to get their kids into the right preschool, right? Because if they get their kids into the right preschool, that's going to get them into the right elementary school. If it gets them into the right elementary school, let's get them into the right high school. The right high school gets them into the right college, and the right college gets them, you know, God only knows what it gets them. But whatever it is, you've got to compete to get it.
Right job. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sign off. This is a crazy day. I don't know, Ruth,
I know.
Cindy.
I know I
I've
gotta
got
get dinner
another
and
long
then,
discussion at 3 and then the deacons meeting. And I think I need 15 minutes to myself.
Okay,
So thank you all, and I'll see you soon.
thank
all
you.
righty.
Okay.
Thank you, Jody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jody.
All right. So, let's see, worst kind of love. If possible to remove spiritual. Oh. Yes, I'm looking at letter 23. Which for me is page 123 of my edition. Through this girl and her disgusting family, the patient is now getting to know more Christians every day, and very intelligent Christians too. For a long time, it will be quite impossible to remove spirituality from his life. Very well, then, we must corrupt it. Let's see. Bottom of that page, you will find that a good many Christian political writers think that Christianity began going wrong and is departing from the doctrine of its founder at a very early stage. Or then there's this long thing about the historical Jesus. Great converts were, this is actually what I'm looking for. It's towards the end of the chapter, on page 126. So it's almost the end. The earliest converts were converted by a single historical fact, the resurrection, and a single theological doctrine, the redemption, operating on a sense of sin which they already had, and sin not against some new fancy, but against the old platitudinous universal moral law which they had been taught by their nurses and mothers. The Gospels came later and were written not to make Christians, but to edify Christians already made. And then down to the bottom of that page, on the other hand, we do want very much to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice. The thing to do is get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands, and then work him on to the stage at which he values Christianity because it may produce social justice. For the enemy will not be used as a convenience. Men or nations who think they can revive faith in order to make a good society might just as well think that they can use the stairs of heaven as a shortcut to the nearest chemist shop. What then is the point of Christianity? According to Screwtape, and I think in this case, directly according to Lewis, we know what Christianity isn't supposed to be, right? It's not supposed to be a means to something else.
Right.
It's not supposed to be a means to building a better world. It's not supposed to be a means to saving the environment. It's not supposed to be a means to a fairer economics. Not that those things are bad. It's not supposed to be a means to achieve something else. Which means, may I just say as an aside, there are many people in the UCC who should read this letter out of the Screwtape Letters, because there are many people in the UCC who think Christianity is important precisely because it's a means to something else. But if it's not supposed to be a means to something else, what's it for?
To bring about the kingdom of God.
Okay, what does that mean?
I know. I know.
Okay, well, let's see. There's I don't know if I and Screwtape may not say here. according to Lewis in Mere Christianity, he says the point of Christianity is to make people into little Christs. And that is the ultimate goal of Christianity is redemption in the biggest possible sense, in the sense of sort of renewing people's full connection to God.
Right.
And that I think probably for Lewis, once people have that fully renewed connection to God, then the other things, saving the environment, building a more fair and just world, those things will sort of take care of themselves. Now, that's Lewis's view. What do you think of that? Right, because I can see attractions in that idea, in Lewis's idea of Christianity, but I can see risks in it as well. You know, the idea that if my Christianity is sort of my relationship with God and restoring my relationship with God, so that's great for me, and that's great for the people around me, possibly. But I think it can lead to a sort of like internally focused form of faith. You know, where my focus is on sort of my relationship with God, which means, of course, my faith ends up being all about me.
Right.
You know, and so that the risk in saying, you know, that Christianity is sort of instrumental, right? It's a tool we can use to build a fairer world, is that you end up focusing on the fairer world and not so much focusing on the faith part. The advantage to it, though, is that it draws you out of yourself. And it connects your religion to something that's bigger than you.
So maybe the goal is for God to be fully known, universally known.
Okay. All right. I ask this question because this is, whenever you get scholars of religion together,
Mm-hmm.
the first question they can't answer is, what's a religion? The second answer that they can't answer is, what is religion for?
We're in trouble.
No, it's just, you know, that's because people like, you know, why should I become a Christian? You know, why are you a Christian, right? What is, you know, why do you go to church? Why do you do what you do? You know, that's
For me, it's recognition that I am God's own child.
okay.
That's who I am.
Okay. So recognizing so it's a way of recognizing your true self.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I am not what the world tells me I am.
Right.
I'm not even what I tell me I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. It's what God, I am what God tells me I am.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Okay.
At least I work on that.
It's a organic process.
Yeah.
But I think about, you know, your comment about, you know, he thought that we would all be little Christs.
Yeah.
That to me is so foreign from what I see as the Christian community. The gifts of the Spirit are so important. Each person has their own gifts to bring. And if we were all the same, if we were all exactly like Christ, it just wouldn't work. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we learn what our strengths are through being in community. I remember at one point in my church in Mystic, we took it was a full morning workshop about identifying our gifts, identifying our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And mine came up as leadership. And I backed away from it. I said, no, I don't want to be, I don't want to lead. I don't want to be in charge. And then as time went on, you know, I was led to do the children's sermon and work on the Board of Ed. And, you know, there was all of these opportunities that were things that I might not have tried and ultimately enjoyed and learned from and had amazing experiences. But if I had not been encouraged by the people around me who said, you already have this gift, you just don't see it in yourself. I mean, that to me is the joy of being in the Christian community, is that you get, you have mentors, you have people who are graciously taking you along the path, making the journey with you. It's about those connections. And it would be very boring, I think, if we all kind of just came out Christ-like, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think each of us is in church and go to church and love our church mainly because of the, well, just for ourselves, but also what each of us brings to the church. But the people you're with are people who have the same values that
Mhm.
you have, that you were brought up with, and then that is the one place that you can that are recognized. And I think we're all there, like we're in this group, because of it, because we want to know more, because we want to learn, and we connect through that.
Okay. Very good. Well, it's just about 5 o'clock. And
This is the first group that I've ever been in where we've talked about the book for 2 hours. When my girlfriends get together, we don't do that.
yeah. Well,
Well, I have to confess something.
yes.
I had trouble with this book.
Mm-hmm.
I just did not know which way this was going.
Yeah.
And when I heard Cindy said that she really had to switch her thinking about it, it made sense to me, because it wasn't until letter 25 that I really started to understand it. However, I'm very proud because I never went to the Spark notes.
Ah, good.
So
Very good.
if I did not have that much to say, it's because I was still trying to figure out the half. So now my own assignment is to reread it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we could probably talk about this for, you
Oh,
know,
Yeah.
a few more months easily. There's so much there.
oh yeah. You can practically go through this book a letter a week.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. If I ever get a divinity school job, that may be it. That's like the inherent class for a semester. We do like a letter a week.
That would be
In fact,
interesting.
if you did that way, you could probably do like a full year seminar on it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway,
I like to be
yes.
challenged.
Yes.
I haven't felt that challenged by something in a long time, which is a good feeling.
Yeah, Lewis. I mean, there's no. I mean, you read C.S. Lewis, and you are abundantly aware of the fact that he is a really smart guy who thinks really big thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes, he's the sort of guy where you read a chapter, you put down the book, you think about it, you pick it up, you read the same chapter, you put it down, you think about it some more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband attended Fairfield University, and that was one of the books. In fact, I have about 3 or 4 books of his. I
Mhm.
did not have this one, but there are some, and now I'm very, very curious, because he was usually talking about C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mountains of good stuff. All right. Well, for next week then,
Next month?
next month, sorry, next month,
Okay.
our book will not be as challenging, and a lot more fun, because we'll read Mennonite in a little black dress. And Rhoda Jansen is the author.
Are we going to order copies from our local bookstore or do it?
You know, I could talk to them about that.
Yeah, it would make.
Support them, that's all.
Yeah. I mean, we could support them, and then we'd all have the same edition, and it would all have the same pages. And you know, actually, let me see what I can do about that. I will report back let's say by Saturday. It could be that this month we're all on our own. I think there's only a couple editions of the book out, so we'll probably end up close. I'll see if we can do that for starting for the month after that.
Okay,
I don't know if they need to make and we need to get the books in time for people to read them.
Yeah.
So let's say this month you're on your own for
Okay.
for December. God, for December. Oh my gosh. For December, we'll try to get something coordinated. Okay. Which means, of course, that we'll need in the next week or so to pick a book for December.
all right.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you, John.
Thank
All
you.
right. I appreciate it. Jan, have a good night. Ruth and Cindy, I'll see you in a couple hours.
See you at 7.
All right.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Bye.